Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
True crime with a dash of the paranormal, the garish, the strange, and the darkly comic. I'm Zevin Odelberg, host of Kinda Murdery, a podcast that's about more than just murder. It's my very own pocket dimension, home to a curated collection of bizarre and compelling stories, the unsolved, the unsettling, and the unbelievable. I cover it all, just so long as it's kinda murdery. It's true. Just like it says in the intro, I am Zevin Odelberg, and this is Kinda Murdery. And you found your way to part 2 of Don't Look Behind the Curtain, Murder at the Bender Inn. That's right, I said part 2, so if you haven't heard part 1 yet, go back and listen to it, and then rejoin us. We'll save you a seat. But if you're all caught up, then we're ready to go. If you'll remember, the search party is just about to investigate what lies beneath that nailed-shut trap door hidden beneath a bed in the Bender Inn. So without further ado, please join me as we uncover what truths we can and solve what mysteries we may. Part 2 of Kinda Murderies, Don't Look Behind the Curtain, Murder at the Bender Inn, starts now. The search party braced themselves as they pried open the sealed trap door, but nothing could have prepared them for the grim tableau that lay beneath. It was a scene so gruesome, so saturated with horror, that had it been penned by the likes of Bram Stoker or Stephen King, it would likely have been dismissed as far too implausible, even for fiction. I'd like to say that it was so gruesome and horrible that it defied description, but that would be a lie. The very air seemed to thicken with the weight of unspoken atrocities, as if reality itself strained under the burden of such malevolent deeds. The scent of decay was so palpable, so three-dimensional in the air that you could almost chew it. The search party, literally quaking in their boots, pried open the nailed-shut trap door. It led to an empty room where the source of the hellish stench finally revealed its sinister origin. Clotted blood had permeated the stone floor, seeping into the soil beneath, as if the very ground had been violated. Yet, surprisingly, no bodies were to be found there. The search expanded to Elvira and Kate's vegetable garden and to the apple orchard, and there, the earth surrendered its horrifying secrets. Buried in a shallow grave was Dr. York, the first in a series of stomach-churning discoveries. By the next day, the garden and an adjacent well had yielded at least 10 more bodies, accompanied by a grotesque assortment of dismembered body parts. All the victims had been subjected to the same savage ritual. A crushing blow to the skull, most likely by a hammer, followed by a cut across the throat. All except for young Mary Ann. Tragically, almost unspeakably, her body showed no signs of such injuries. The implication was clear. The baby had been buried alive. Dear God. As if to intensify the horror, many of the corpses had been indecently mutilated, suggesting acts of genital torture extending even beyond the moment of death. The discovery left an indelible mark on the community. Not just a physical space had been defiled, but the very fabric of trust and decency that holds a society together had been ripped and torn savagely apart. These crimes were not just violent. They were not just gruesome. They were a violation of basic human ethics, a grim testament to the depths of darkness that can reside in the human soul, assuming the Benders had souls at all. The Bender dining table had one seat of honor strategically positioned against a canvas room divider and directly above the ominous trapdoor that led to the blood-soaked cellar below. When an unsuspecting guest took that seat, a hammer's blow would swiftly descend upon them from behind the divider, rendering them unconscious or worse. A second act of brutality swiftly followed, the slash across the throat, carried out with cold precision by one of the women. Once the guest's life had been distinguished, the corpse would be unceremoniously dropped through the trapdoor. Now, as some of you probably know, in many if not most cultures and in almost all fairy tales, Guests, even guests who are your enemies outside of your home, are accorded the benefits and protections of hospitality. To mistreat or harm a guest is a violation of the most fundamental and universal moral rules of not just humanity, but even mythical creatures like fairies, elves, and trolls. It seems as though it was important to the Bender family that it was their objective to transgress as far and as extremely against all rules of behavior, against all moral codes, even those upheld by actual monsters from actual horror stories. There was no line that the Benders would not cross, and if a new line were created, they'd make sure to cross that line too. Back to the Benders' MO. After the guest's skull had been crushed, their throat slit, and their body dropped through the trap door, the body would be stripped and the Benders would make a decision, either to bury the body in its entirety or to dismember it. Surprisingly, or perhaps not, valuables were often left on the victims, implying that the Benders were not in this, figuratively speaking, for the money, but that rather their primary motivation was that they derived some perverse satisfaction or thrill from the very act of killing. Bullet holes riddled the walls of the Bender cabin, a haunting echo of desperate struggles of victims who had sensed their fate and tried in vain to fight back. The Bender family's chilling process wasn't just murder, it was an entire system, carefully thought out and executed with a disturbing level of attention to detail. As I just mentioned, the crimes weren't driven by financial gain, but by an even darker impulse, a craving for the suffering of others. This revelation forces us to confront unsettling questions about human nature and what drives someone not just to kill, but to create an elaborate stage upon which the most depraved, and I hate to use an adjective that could even be at all construed as positive, but creatively depraved impulses of the human mind can be made horrifyingly real. You've heard me say many times before how we often choose to define murderers and those who commit other awful acts as monsters to separate them from ourselves, but that in fact, monstrosity is an almost uniquely human trait, and the Benders are an extreme example of that truth. Among the scant pieces of evidence discovered in the abandoned Bender cabin were the tattered pages of a Bible written in German. These pages revealed another layer of deception, naming John Jr. as one John Gebhardt. Coupled with this revelation, neighbors began to piece together the unsettling possibility that John Jr. and Kate were not siblings at all, but rather a couple entwined in a dark partnership. And the lies didn't end there. It appeared the Bender name itself was a fabrication. There's a grim likelihood that none of the four people in this horrific tale were actually Benders by birth. Evidence points towards Elvira, the mother figure, being born as Elmira Mark in the rugged Adirondack Mountains. Her life story is tainted with whispers of multiple husbands and children, some of whom, it's rumored, died of head injuries eerily similar to the Bender victims. As for John Sr., it's believed he was born as John Flickinger and immigrated from either Germany or the Netherlands. Kate Bender's true identity is thought to be Eliza Griffith, Elvira's fifth child. In unraveling these aliases, we're forced to grapple with a web of lies so complex that it's difficult to discern where the deceit ends and the truth begins. But what is evident is that each member of this macabre ensemble had a past they wished to escape, identities they wanted to shed, perhaps as easily as they shed the blood of their victims. And what's profoundly unsettling is the sheer depth of their deception, not just in names and relations, but in their cruel manipulation of social norms and trust, all to fulfill a sadistic lust for violence. You know what I'd like to know? And I don't have these answers, so forgive me, I don't believe that anyone has these answers, but if in fact they were not family, other than Kate being Elvira's daughter, how did they all meet each other? And how did they all reveal to each other, or how did they all discover that each of them was a horrific serial killing monster with a lust for violence? I mean, how do you bring that up with a new friend? We're talking about four unrelated people who somehow all came together for the express purpose of repeatedly engaging in sadistic orgies of horrific violence? Wow. As Shakespeare would say, I suppose, There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. And that's true for good or ill, in this case, spectacularly ill. In the shocking aftermath of the horrors uncovered at the Bender property, influential figures wasted no time taking action. State Senator Alexander York and Kansas Governor Thomas A. Osborne placed heavy bounties on the heads of the Bender family. Diligent detectives were able to follow wagon tracks, finding the family's abandoned horses near Thayer, a location just 12 miles north of the inn. The abandoned horses were concrete, real evidence. But from that juncture on, discerning fact from fiction became increasingly complex. It's as if the Benders vanished into the misty pages of a Grimm's Brothers dark fairy tale, leaving behind only the terror that they wrought. Their disappearance shrouds them in a sort of mythological mystery, like monsters from folklore that vanish once their wicked deeds come to light. But this was no made-up story. This was no boogeyman, Krampus, or Freddy Krueger. Lessons in morality made sadistic flesh and blood to frighten and educate unruly children. No. The Benders were real, and their crimes so viscerally disturbing and horrific as to beggar the imagination of the most twisted campfire or bedtime storyteller. And their disappearance left Osage Township and the broader Kansas Territories community grappling with the horrifying reality that evil, once unveiled, can dissipate just as quickly, leaving an everlasting impact and questions that may never find answers. The long tangled trail of the Bender family's whereabouts after their gruesome crimes has been strewn with whispers, rumors, and partial truths that baffle the imagination. While some believe that John Jr. and Kate slipped away to an outlaw haven near the borderlands of Texas and New Mexico, a place where even the bravest lawmen feared to tread, there are others who trust the word of a detective claiming John Jr. had died of apoplexy near that very border, a terminus of a life of nefarious deeds, if the detective's account holds water. On another front, stories floated around that Ma and Kate Bender had charted a course for St. Louis, Missouri. Their ghastly legacy was so pervasive that for years to come, any pair of women traveling in tandem were scrutinized as potential incarnations of Kate and Elvira Bender. That specter, that perpetual sense of dread and the unknown, hovered over the communities they left in their wake. And let us not forget the vigilante groups, fueled by righteous indignation, who declared that they had exacted frontier justice on the Bender family. Yet tellingly, not one presented the evidence required to claim the substantial cash reward offered by the state. This brings forth questions about the very fabric of human morality and justice, exposing the unnerving limits to which a society will go when law and order collapse. Efforts to bring the Benders to justice took a series of unexpected turns years after their horrifying crimes. In 1884, an aged man was apprehended in Idaho. The particulars of his case were striking. He fit Pa Bender's description and was accused of a hammer murder, eerily echoing the Benders' grim modus operandi. However, in a desperate bid for freedom that encapsulates the human instinct for self-preservation, even among those we'd consider monstrous, perhaps especially among those we'd consider monstrous, this man who may have been Pa Bender tried to sever his own foot to escape custody. Like a coyote chewing through its own paw to escape a hunter's steel trap, this maybe Pa Bender had strong animal instincts. But his gruesome escape attempt had catastrophic results both for him and for the pursuit of justice. He bled out almost immediately and died before any positive identification could be made. The opportunity for closure, so tantalizingly close, was snatched away, leaving only a cascade of what-ifs and could-have-beens. Now we fast forward to 1889, where another uncanny episode unfolded. In Michigan, a mother-daughter duo named Almira, that's pretty close to Elvira, and her daughter Sarah Elizabeth found themselves arrested for larceny. Soon, whispers grew louder that they were in fact the notorious Elvira and Kate Bender. They were brought to Kansas for identification. A panel convened from Labette County, but they could come to no definite conclusion. Were they the Benders? Could these possibly be the women whose acts had spilled so much innocent blood? The panel could not agree. Doubt that ever-present shroud that clouds justice, led to Elmira and Sarah Elizabeth's release, and they were sent back to Michigan. Their true identities, still a lingering mystery. These incidents highlight the complexity and limitations of both human memory and identification, casting a shadow over our yearning for justice and closure. In the end, the Bender family, whether by fate or design, seemed to escape the firm grasp of retribution, of vengeance, of justice, of any real punishment or reckoning, leaving a community forever haunted by that absence of closure. Again, it was as if they were the magical monsters from a Grimm's fairy tale, their final chapters unsettlingly unwritten. By the way, I don't know if any of you have read the actual original Grimm's fairy tales. I did as a kid. They are super gruesome and violent compared to what we know in pop culture in the US. I'll give you one example and then we'll get back to the story here. In the original Snow White, the evil queen is captured and taken to Snow White and Prince Charming's wedding, where, as punishment for her horrible behavior, her attempts to murder Snow White, a pair of copper slippers is taken with tongs, shoved into white-hot coals in the fireplace at the wedding reception, and then once the copper slippers are white-hot, they are forced onto the evil queen's feet, and she is made to dance in them for the amusement of the assembled crowd at Snow White's wedding reception. That is how the original story of Snow White ends. So when I keep saying that the Benders are like characters from Grimm's fairy tales, they are. They're like characters from the real Grimm's fairy tales, not the sanitized Disney versions. So while the elusive Benders appeared to evade the firm grip of justice, their sinister web of criminality did not go entirely unpunished. In an ironic twist, a total of 12 men faced legal repercussions, not for murder, but as accessories to the Benders' reign of terror. These men were implicated for aiding and abetting in the disposal of stolen goods, a series of crimes that, while less grim than murder, reveals how the tendency of criminal activity often entangles more than just the primary perpetrators. Among those charged was Mitt Cherry, a member of the vigilante committee tasked with upholding law and order. Cherry's own misdeeds came to light in an act of audacious betrayal. He had forged a letter to the wife of one of the victims, leading her to believe that her husband had reached his destination safely. Cherry, lying on behalf of the Benders, concealing the true fate of one of their murder victims, was a revelation that further unraveled the social fabric of a community already in tatters, forcing them to question even those figures who were, at least on the surface, entrusted with the community's protection. This set of charges against members of the various vigilante groups that were supposedly in pursuit of the Benders, as well as the ensuing investigations, point to a broader, deeply unsettling reality: that evil does not ever operate in a vacuum. It all too often finds willing accomplices, people who, while not directly participating in the horror, play a role in perpetuating it. This is a concept that the German-American philosopher and historian Hannah Arendt referred to as the banality of evil. While these men may not have wielded the hammer or slit the throats of innocent travelers, their actions facilitated a climate in which such crimes could persist. It serves as a cautionary tale about the blurred lines of morality, forcing us to ponder the many shades of complicity in the face of unrestrained wickedness. The grim tale of the Benders evolved into a dark chapter of American folklore, drawing throngs of tourists and souvenir hunters to what was once a secluded homestead. The property, now stripped bare, bears the scars of human curiosity. Even the bricks that once made up the cellar and the stones that formed the well have been taken. It's as if the collective psyche wanted to possess fragments of this horrible story, almost as relics of human malice. Objects purported to be from the Bender estate, like hammers now displayed at the Cherryvale Museum and a blood-stained knife held by the Kansas Historical Society, serve as chilling artifacts and reminders of the Bender family and the unspeakable atrocities they committed. In an eerie tradition that lingers like a persistent shadow even today, traveling mothers and daughters in Kansas might still hear themselves jokingly compared to Ma and Kate Bender. The joke is both a nod to history and a testament to the undying narrative of the Benders, who have been elevated to a status akin to mythical figures, almost like ghoulish murdering cryptids or representations of murderous femininity such as arise in other cultures, for example, Mexico's La Llorona or Japan's Kuchisaki Onna. But unlike those legends, Ma and Kate Bender were very real, creatures of flesh and blood and murder. And the lighthearted teasing, calling two women traveling together, an older and a younger, Ma and Kate Bender, veils a somber truth, that the Bender story has been so deeply ingrained in the local and national consciousness, precisely because it disturbs us. It holds up a mirror to the potential for evil that lies at the periphery of human nature, at once fascinating and repellent. The tourism, the continued fascination with the Bender property and the objects associated with it, heck, even this podcast, are a testament to our collective struggle to comprehend the incomprehensible. It's as though touching a piece of dark history brings us closer to understanding the human capacity for cruelty, and therein lies the paradox. In our quest to understand evil, we grant it a form of immortality. As we've just discussed, the Bender women in particular achieved an enduring notoriety, becoming etched in the annals of history as figures of abject horror, their deeds too grotesque to be forgotten, and too mysterious to be fully understood. And of course, those two qualities are what make them so fascinating as well. The tale of the Bloody Benders has seeped into the very fabric of American storytelling, inspiring countless renditions that capture both imagination and trepidation. Among these fictional adaptations stands the account of renowned prairie writer Laura Ingalls Wilder. In her annotated autobiography, Pioneer Girl, she speculated on the dark fate of the Bender family, insinuating that her own father, Pa Ingalls, had joined a vigilante hunt to bring them to justice. While historical accuracy concerning the Ingalls' proximity to the Benders is contested, Wilder's narrative accentuates the blend of fact and fiction that has enveloped the family's notorious exploits. It's a tale so unnerving that even stalwarts of Americana, like Wilder, couldn't resist delving into its dark implications. And this storytelling tradition persists today in the present, expanding its tendrils into various forms of media. The popular TV show Supernatural crafted an episode featuring a family of serial killers named the Benders, a hat tip to the haunting realities of the real-life family. Video games have also paid homage. In Red Dead Redemption, two main characters are eerily modeled after John Jr. and Kate Bender. In fact, there's another example that hits even closer to home for me personally. I'm sure some of you have seen the cult hit horror movie Cabin in the Woods, starring Fran Kranz. Well, those of you who have been listening to Kinda Murdery for a while now know that Fran is a close friend of mine, and he's been a guest on the show several times. So if you haven't heard his episodes, check them out. Anyway, Fran stars in Cabin in the Woods alongside Chris Hemsworth and Jesse Williams, and if you've seen it, and if you haven't, this isn't really a spoiler, so I'm just going to continue. But Cabin in the Woods features a family of redneck torture zombies named the Buckners. And, as fandom.com puts it, quote, except for the undead paranormal aspect, the Buckners are almost completely identical to the historical Bloody Benders, a family of serial killers who owned an inn and a small general store in Labette County, Kansas, and murdered several travelers between 1871 and 1873, unquote. These artistic adaptations of the real-life Benders serve a dual purpose. On the one hand, they leverage the macabre fascination the public has with the actual Benders, commercializing it into digestible pieces of entertainment. And you could argue that that's what I'm doing right now with this podcast episode. But on a more profound level, they underline our collective need to process the chilling aspects of human nature, to frame them within the context of stories we can manage, analyze, and ultimately distance ourselves from. And yet, the more we transform these dark chapters of history into folklore and fiction, the more indelible they become, like blood-red ink stains on the pages of our cultural memory. I'm Zevin Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery.